Hello and welcome to another video tutorial. My name is Jonathan Lampel, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make a cloth for Arch-Viz scenes in Blender. So architectural visualization is something that's become a lot more popular recently, especially if you've seen Andrew Price's trailer for the Architecture Academy. Looks really good. Training course for Blender. I highly recommend you go look at it because it's very cool. And one of the things about architecture, especially interiors, is a lot of the times there's cloth either being draped over something or a bedspread or whatever, and it really helps add to the atmosphere and makes it look a lot more natural and lived in. So here I have a couch already set up. I just downloaded it off Blendswap because I'm a little bit lazy. It's a Chesterfield sofa by Dr. Boyver-Leduc. So credit to him, and you can go download it yourself. And so what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to place a kind of a cloth over it, like being draped off the side, like it was in the thumbnail. But this technique can be used for all sorts of things, like as I said, bedspreads, sheets, pretty much anything you want to do with cloth. And it's very simple, but it works quite well. So first off, we're going to be using the cloth modifier to get the initial shape of the cloth, but to do this we're going to have a collision object. And if we did that with this couch here, you see this is very high polygon, and it would take forever to have this as a collision object because there's just too many polygons and it would take a very long time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select everything, press Shift D, and move it to a second layer. Now in this layer I already have a floor set up as a collision object here, but with this couch I'm going to select everything, deselect the floor, make sure that one of these is the active object. It doesn't matter which one, so just make sure you have everything selected and press Control J. And what that's going to do is, that's going to join them all together, but I forgot to apply the modifiers first. So in this on this part of the chair, I'm going to apply the mirror modifier, apply the smooth modifier, and I don't need to apply the subsurf modifiers. So apply the mirror. Are there any other modifiers? I'll apply that, or I'll just apply both of them. Okay. So that looks like it's all set. Now I'll try that again. Control J. And now we see that this is all one big object. And this has even more polygons, but what I can do now is I can add a modifier and decimate. And what this modifier does is it just breaks down the topology and makes this a much simpler mesh while still leaving the same shape. So say for instance, right now we have, looks like 159,956 faces. But if I take the ratio down to say 0.5, it will cut that number in exactly half while leaving 105,207 faces, while the shape looks very similar to what it did before. You can see that in edit mode it still looks the same. You can't see it in edit mode really, but you can see in wireframe, not in edit mode, you can see in wireframe that the topology of the mesh is really messed up. But it doesn't matter since we're just going to be using this as a proxy object. We can take this down very far. So I'm going to say 0.05. And it might take a few minutes. But here you can see that this is not a very good looking object at all, but since it's just a proxy mesh, it still has the exact same shape. But if I go ahead and apply this and go into edit mode, you can see that it's awful, but it has so many less polygons. So now I don't have to worry about increasing the simulation time because this will work just fine. So back in object mode, I'm going to add what's going to be our little blanket, and I'm going to position it over where I want it to fall on the chair. So I'm going to put it right about there, so it can just kind of fall on the seat. And I'm going to subdivide it in edit mode. Press W and subdivide. Open the toolbar. I'm going to cut it, say, 25 times, and that'll be a good starting place for now. Before we go any further, something really important that we can do is press U and unwrap. And that's going to keep the UVs intact while it goes through the simulation, because we're going to be applying the cloth modifier. But if you don't have it unwrapped beforehand, you're going to find it impossible to put any sort of texture or pattern on this. So unwrapping it now saves us a whole lot of trouble. So now I can go and make this a cloth object and make this one a collision object. And as I play it back, you can see now exactly what it does. It just kind of folds itself over the couch. So it looks all right, but it could use a few improvements. First off, we can look at the cloth settings, and we can see that we have different presets here. I'm not going to go in all of these like dampening and material options. If you want me to do a more in-depth tutorial on cloth, I can do that, but for the time being, I'm just going to select silk from the cloth presets. Basically, each of these are different materials in real life that it's going to try to mimic, and what silk does is it tries to make it very flexible. It doesn't really, well, it stretches a little bit, but not as much as rubber, but it also has very fine wrinkles. And that's the important thing here, is that we need the fine wrinkles that are going to add a lot of detail to the simulation. So I'm going to select silk, and even as I play it back, it'll look a little bit better, but there's still going to be a problem with it, and you can see that here in this corner, where the cloth is just kind of folding in on itself, and it looks like it's intersecting with something that's not even there, or it's intersecting with itself, more like. And all I need to do is enable self collision, and you know, if you find it still not working very well, you can increase the quality and such. But I don't think we're going to need to do that here. So you can play that back, and now it no longer, it looks like it does that a little bit in the corners right there. So I'm going to take the quality up to 2. Okay, it looks like we are doing just fine. I'm going to change this to smooth shading so we can see a little bit better what's going on. And that was a really boring place to have it fall, so I'm going to try to make it look a little bit more dynamic. Maybe put it over the chair and just kind of see how it goes. Right now I'm just kind of testing the overall shaping of things. Okay, that looks pretty good. I'm just going to move it over the arm a little bit more. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. That should be good enough for now. So now that we have the overall form, I'm going to go back in, press W and subdivide one more time so we have a little bit more detail. But you'll notice that even if I added even more, it would take just way too long to simulate, and we still wouldn't necessarily have all the detail that we want. So after this is done, I'm going to go through and add a little bit more detail. I don't really like how springy that is, how it's kind of stretching so much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to see structural. I'm going to increase this to say 8. This is something that definitely takes a lot of tweaking. It's not necessarily, you know, modeling physics. Simulations always just take tweaking. That's pretty much the rule of thumb. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. It looks like it's naturally just kind of draped over the side of the armchair, and it's coming down, and it looks quite good. So You may not think it looks good right now, but I'm going to go ahead and apply the cloth modifier. So now this is an actual mesh object and it's stationary just like that. And now I'm going to add, or I could add, a subdivision surface. And if I turn this up, you can see that it actually looks fairly good. Sorry for that voice crack there. But instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a multi-resolution modifier, subdivide that once. I'm going to go into sculpt mode, and now I can go in and add the extra details, any extra details that I want. So for instance, if I decide there needs to be more wrinkles here, I can go in and add those wrinkles manually and have it look much better just by manually adding in any detail that I want. So I could spend quite a while just kind of tweaking the different wrinkles. You'll notice that I'm just using the normal drawing brush, and you kind of go in the direction that the cloth is being pulled, and you can press Control to get a negative effect. What's that called? I don't know, opposite. So instead of pushing it out, it's instead pulling it back in. So you can see that here. This is normal, and that is the opposite, adding little caves instead of mountains. It's really bugging me that I forgot what that's called. Options? Oh, add and subtract. I feel really dumb. Okay, so anyway, adding and subtracting. That's like the most basic thing in the world. And I forgot what it's called. That's pretty awkward. Alright, so I'm sculpting along and just kind of adding in minor little details. Near the edges, I'm going to make the creases more evident, and then towards the ends, I'm going to press Shift and just kind of smooth it out so it just kind of naturally tapers off. And you know, you could spend a lot of time doing this. You could subdivide one more time and add in even more detail. You could look at it from whatever camera perspective that you're going to have. It looks like I'm going to want something like, let's see here. You can delete the collision object if you want, because we're not going to be using that anymore. And if you want, you can move the cloth back to this layer so it's actually sitting on the couch. And you'll notice that it's hovering a little bit above, and you can just go ahead and move that back down, because I just had to do with the collision margin. Let's move it a little bit that way, and there we go. Okay, that was kind of a side tangent. I was sculpting. But yeah, you can look at the camera from the perspective of the camera and see exactly what you need to fix. So just adding some here, some there, and just kind of make it look as natural as possible. Definitely takes some practice, and I'm certainly not the best at it, but it just takes a little practice. And you'll notice that when it's on the back side of the cloth, your brush is going to have the opposite effect, and when it's supposed to be adding, it's going to subtract, and when it's supposed to be subtracting, it's going to add, because it is on the back side of the mesh. Because the brush goes in the direction of the normal. Okay, so my quick little sketch here doesn't really look all that perfect, but that's okay. I think we can live with it. I was just giving you the idea that you can go in and manually add your own details, and that really helps. So now I'm just gonna go back into object mode, and you can see how it's doing. If you want, you can smooth it out a little bit. If those wrinkles are too harsh, add a smooth modifier, and it's just going to overall smooth the entire object out, which is pretty nice. Yeah, okay. So that looks pretty good. One last thing is I'm going to add a Solidify Modifier. What that's going to do is give an actual thickness to this. And you can see that if it's too thick, you're going to have these edges poking through. So maybe 0.005. 0.0035. Okay, that's looking pretty good. And now we can go ahead and go on to rendering. So, as you might have seen before, I already have my lights set up and have this little studio backdrop. I just have my main light, my fill light, and my rim light. So it's just a basic 3-point lighting setup with a backdrop. So I can rotate that around. Okay, perfect. And since my earlier render for the thumbnail was from a different angle, I can go ahead and tweak the lighting. Actually have a lighting setup right here, which is really handy. Just two different screens. One of them is rendered, and one of them I tweak the lighting on. So the sun is going to be coming from the upper left in terms of the camera, like so. And you can see that you can single out these lights, which is really, really handy, by clicking the eye icon. So all I'm seeing right now is what this light is doing, and I can kind of adjust that until it's exactly what I want, which looks like right there. Looks nice. Then I can go on and move to the other light, which this is just a fill light, which looks like that's doing a nice job. And lastly, the rim light, which is going to be opposite the camera, pointing directly at it and kind of at an angle. That gives a nice rim light effect. Okay, so now we have our lighting all set. But now we have to go on to materials. So this will not take very long. I can just go into, this is the node editor here, this is the rendering window, and this is the 3D view that I can work with. I've already preset all of these, and you can watch a video on how to do that. It's like my first video, I think, of how to customize the UI, so I won't go over that right now. So I'm just going to select this object here and add a new material. I'm going to call it cloth. And it's already got a diffuse, but I don't really want it to be diffuse. I want there to be a little bit more depth to it, so I'm going to add a shader and a mix shader. And I'm going to mix it with a velvet shader. And you can see, if it's just the velvet, what the velvet shader does is it adds these highlights and adds these kind of shadows and really helps emphasize the shape of the cloth. So I generally do it somewhere between the two, so maybe, I don't know, a nice 0.5. It looks very, very soft, very silky, so it looks pretty good. But I also mix this with a translucent shader because there's going to be light passing through it. It's not a completely solid object, so that helps it not transparent. It's going to help it make it a little bit more realistic. Okay, so not quite 0.5, maybe 0.25. And there we go. There's definitely a lot of different kinds of cloth. You could make it more, you know, satiny. You could make it more fluffy. You could even add fur to it. You could do quite a lot, but this is just a basic shader for cloth that I use quite often. Is a combination of these three shaders. So lastly, if you want to texture the object, you'll see that if you add a texture, and let's just, for simplicity, let's add a checker texture. And if I plug that into the diffuse and scale this up to say 15, you're going to notice a whole lot of problems, especially over in this area up here where it's all wrinkled. You're going to notice a lot of stretching, and it just doesn't work very well. Yeah, you can see right here, it just looks awful, and that's because it's using the texture coordinate of generated. So you can see, if I plug that in, that's not doing anything. You can try all of these, and none of them will work for cloth. It just looks awful for every single one. Even object, which generally works better than generated, looks even worse. So, thankfully we UV unwrapped the object before we applied the cloth modifier. So when I plug this in, now it is perfect, and I can scale this up to say 25 or something. And now we have a perfectly UV unwrapped cloth, and it works great. So lastly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of bump for a tiny bit of added realism. I'm going to add a texture and a wave texture. I'm going to plug that into the displacement. One note, I did not plug the checker texture into the velvet because that way you won't get these highlights inside the black. Because if you do that, then you won't get any of those highlights, which you're going to want. So only plug that into the diffuse. Alright, so this is obviously way too strong and way too large, and it's not even using the right coordinates, so I'm going to plug UV into there. And you can see that it's way too big, so let's try something like 100. Still too big. Okay, I'm going to try something like 750. See how that goes. Okay, that's looking pretty good, and now I can Shift A, add a color and hue saturation value. And what I can do with this is turn down the bump value so it's not so glaringly obvious. So I can turn that down to 0.1. It looks like it's still a bit strong, so maybe 0.025. Because we want this to be a very subtle effect. And maybe even 0.01. Okay, so you can barely see it in the highlights there, but it definitely adds something. You can see it right there and right there. It adds that little bit of realism where you would normally get a knit cloth, and if you want to do more of a close-up, you would definitely want to add your own actual like knitted texture or whatever. But for a shot of this length, that should do fine. So really, that was all I was going to show you. Just remember that it's first cloth modifier. No, sorry. First it's proxy collision object, cloth modifier, sculpting, and adding your materials. And don't forget to UV unwrap it, or else you're not going to be able to add any sort of texture, and you're going to have to do the whole thing over, and that kind of sucks. So I hope you learned something from this tutorial. If you liked it, then feel free to subscribe for more tutorials, because that definitely encourages me to help keep pumping them out. And yeah, so thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.